Well, good morning. My name is Michael Ots, and it's great to be able to join you as we look at this really big question together. Why is our world so broken? We're going to have an opportunity for live Q&A at the end of our time together this morning, so please do be thinking of your questions over the next 20 minutes. I was scrolling through Facebook just the other day, and this image came up that really made me smile. It's a picture from the film Back to the Future, and the doc is explaining to Marty about his new car that's able to travel through time. But someone has retrospectively written on top of the picture, rule number 1, never go to 2020. You see, how many of us would have imagined that our world would have turned out the way it has this year? All of our lives have been turned upside down. The coronavirus pandemic has affected us all, either directly or indirectly. There have been many who've been tragically bereaved, but all of us have had to adjust to living in lockdown, and many of us face a really uncertain future. But it's not just coronavirus, is it? We looked in horror a few weeks ago as George Floyd was brutally murdered on the streets of Minneapolis by a white policeman. And we've seen the repercussions of that around our world as people demand for justice and insist that black lives really do matter. We look at Hong Kong and the growing threat to democracy there. We see the growing tensions between the two greatest populations on earth, India and China, and the possibility of real conflict between those two countries. And we ask this question, why is our world so broken? But actually, we might want to back up a second and ask another question, and that is, why do we think that our world is broken? Where does that come from? You see, according to the materialistic worldview, that is a worldview that excludes the idea of a creator God. According to that worldview, this world isn't broken, this world is just the way it is. Richard Dawkins famously put it this way. He said, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." He says, DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. You see, if we are just and nothing more than the result of the process of evolution, why do we have this sense that there is something wrong about our world? You see, if we are the end result of a process where the strong survive at the expense of the weak, what's so bad about coronavirus, where the strong normally survive at the expense of the weak? And where do we get this intrinsic sense of value that all human beings have? It's not from Charles Darwin's own book on the origin of the species. For interestingly, the full title of that book is actually this: On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. Where do we get this sense of value from then? And why do we feel that our world is broken? Atheism doesn't have the answer to those questions. And one of the things, therefore, I find really attractive about the Christian story is that it does make sense of our questions and our struggles as we look at a broken world. Because one of the things that the Bible absolutely affirms is that our world is broken, that our world is not the way it's meant to be, and that something has gone wrong. You see, the storyline of the Bible is this, that God created a world that was good, a world without suffering, pain, tears or death, a world where viruses didn't have the devastating impacts that we've seen in the last few months. And into that good world, God created people in his image. In other words, God created people with intrinsic value, significance and worth. That is why we have this sense that all of our lives matter, because the Bible says we were created to reflect something of God's divine image in who we are. But of course, that's not the way we see the world today. So when we look at our world and say, it shouldn't be this way, when we ask the question, why is our world so broken? You're absolutely right in doing so. Because this world is not the way it once was, according to the Bible. This world is broken and it's not the way it should be. But the question is, why is it so broken? What has gone wrong? To answer that question, maybe it would be helpful to think for a few moments about statues. Statues have been in the news a lot over the last few weeks, ever since the statue of Edward Colston was ripped down, dragged through the streets of Bristol and dumped in the harbour. For although Colston was a philanthropist who gave much of his money away to help the poor of his city, he also made that money off the back of the slave trade, off the back of the misery and death of thousands of black Africans. And it would seem fairly obvious, wouldn't it, that we'd want to remove statues of people like him. Just as Russians would want to get rid of images of Stalin and Germans the symbol of the swastika, so surely we'd want to get rid of these symbols of injustice and oppression. That would seem absolutely right. But it does raise a question, and that is, how far do we go? Other statues are now in question, other places may have to be renamed. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has set up a commission to look into the removal of statues and the renaming of certain places. But that might raise some interesting questions for him personally. Just 2 years ago, he unveiled a statue of Millicent Fawcett in Parliament Square. Millicent Fawcett was a prominent suffragette who fought for women's right to vote, and for that she is rightly celebrated. But she also was very involved in the death of 25,000 black Africans in the Boer War. So should she be celebrated when there's another part to her past? It's very popular today to try and divide the world into two groups. You have the oppressed and the oppressors. You have the victims and you have the privileged. And the way to change our world is to get rid of those who cause oppression and to side with the oppressed. But is that too simplistic a way of looking at it? You see, when you look at someone like Millicent Fawcett, you realise that in some ways she was oppressed, but in other ways she was an oppressor. Maybe all of us are actually a bit of both. I recently finished reading this book, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It tells of the author's horrific experiences in the Russian Gulag, that is the Soviet version of the concentration camp. And he shows how this ideology that splits the world into the oppressed and the oppressor actually in the long run can lead to even greater oppression. You see, people within that system were found guilty not so much for what they individually had done, but for simply being part of the wrong group. Not only did this lead to great oppression, but within that experience of being in the Gulag, Solzhenitsyn came to an incredible realization. It would have been very easy for him to see the problems of the world of being all external to himself, what other people had done to him. It would have been very easy for him to see the problem of the world simply being limited to the political system that he had suffered at the hands of. But he didn't do that. Listen to what he says. So let the reader who expects this book to be a political expose slam its covers shut right now. If only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Now that's not to say that he thinks that all people are equally good and bad. For he goes on to say, during the life of any heart, this line keeps changing place. Sometimes it's squeezed one way by exuberant evil, and sometimes it shifts to allow enough space for good to flourish. One and the same human being is, at various ages, under various circumstances, a totally different human being. At times, he is close to being a devil, at times to sainthood. But his name doesn't change. And to that name we ascribe the whole lot, good and evil. Socrates taught us, know thyself. But it's his conclusion that I found particularly challenging. He continues, confronted by the pit into which we are about to toss those who have done us harm, we halt, stricken dumb. It is, after all, only because of the way things worked out that they were the executioners, and we weren't. Solzhenitsyn's words actually echo the words of someone who spoke 2,000 years before. Jesus once was speaking to a group of people who were incredibly self-righteous. They were incredibly convinced of their own goodness, and they thought all of the problems of the world were external to themselves. But Jesus really challenged them when he said this, "For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evil come from inside and defile a person." Jesus says the problem of our world is not just out there. The problem of our world is also in here. Jesus says our world is broken because we are broken. Yes, we are created in the image of God, and we are still able to reflect something of God's goodness, love, and self-sacrifice. But we've also disconnected ourselves from God, from the source of all love, life, and goodness. And so we're also capable of doing the opposite. We're capable of causing real hurt and pain to others through the things that we do or say, or maybe through the things that we don't do or don't say. Our world is broken because we are broken. Now you might say, well, how does that affect something like coronavirus? Who's to blame for that? That's a really good question. But what the Bible does say is that when people turned away from God, that had implications, not just for them and their relationships, but it had implications for everything. Our whole world has been affected by that. So the New Testament part of the Bible says that our world is groaning, it's broken, it's longing for liberation. It doesn't work the way it should. Everything has been affected by this. C.S. Lewis, the Oxford professor, put it this way. He said, God whispers to us in our pleasures, he speaks to us in our conscience, but he shouts at us in our pain. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. As we look at the brokenness out there, maybe it's designed to make us realise that there's also brokenness in here. We aren't the people we should be. But Jesus didn't simply come into our world to show us what the problem is. He came into this world to offer a solution. As one Christian writer put it, Jesus didn't come to rub it in, he came to rub it out. You see, Jesus stepped into this broken, hurting and messed up world and experienced the whole range of human emotions that go with that. He experienced injustice, and he experienced oppression, and ultimately experienced horrific agony as he was crucified on a cross. You see, the symbol at the heart of the Christian faith is a symbol of oppression. But it's not a symbol of God oppressing us, but a symbol of God becoming oppressed for us. And that fact is so significant. Because when we go through experiences of oppression ourselves, when we find ourselves the victims of injustice, when we go through times of suffering, we can look at Jesus on the cross and we can see a God who understands what it's like, who stands with us in our oppression, our injustice and our suffering. But when we face up to the fact that we ourselves can be the oppressors, when we face up to the fact that we are not the people we should be, we can also look at Jesus on the cross and we can see the God who takes the punishment that we deserve, the ultimate justice that we should face, so that we can be forgiven, so that we can be set free, so that we can be transformed, so that we can be changed. I wonder, have you ever realised that? And have you ever come to experience the forgiveness and the transformation that Jesus can bring? But that's also not the end of the story. The Bible tells us that the world we live in is not the way it once was. But wonderfully, it also says it's not the way it one day will be. Something has gone wrong, but one day it is going to be put right. I saw this cartoon in a newspaper recently. God is being asked by an angel what he's going to do about the world that seems so broken. And he says, have you tried turning the whole thing off and turning it back on again? Made me laugh because when technology goes wrong, that's normally what I do and it normally fixes it. But it got me thinking, actually that is nearer the truth than we might think. Because the Bible says that there is a day when God is going to restart, as it were, to remake our broken world. The Christian hope for the future is not that we leave this world and go off to some cloud called heaven where we play harps and we go to choir practice for all eternity. The Bible's hope for the future is that one day God is going to restore and transform this very world and these very bodies. It's a real, physical and wonderful hope, and it's utterly unique. Now, when I start to talk about hope like that, I guess there are three objections that might come to our mind. The first is this: isn't that just some illusion, some wishful thinking? Isn't that some kind of Freudian projection of our longings into the heavens? But what I want to say is, the hope that the Bible offers us is not too good to be true, but it is good because it's true. You see, the Christian hope in the future is not based on wish fulfillment, a nice idea or a new philosophy. It's based on the historical event of Jesus Christ's resurrection from the dead. An event that you can investigate and check out for yourself. I haven't got time to unpack that now, but you may want to ask questions in a moment about the evidence for that historically. And you may be surprised to realise that it's quite compelling. Indeed, it has changed the minds of people who are probably far more sceptical than you are right now. This isn't wish fulfillment, this is true. But the second objection you might have is this. How does this affect my life today? Isn't this just pie in the sky? Isn't this just burying your head in the sand and hoping for the best? But again, I want to say no. Those who have been gripped by the reality of the Bible's hope for the future are not those who bury their head in the sand and hope that all the problems will go away. But actually, historically, we see they are the people who have been sent out into this broken world with the greatest motivation to want to make a difference, to want to bring healing and help and justice to our broken world. Let me give you two brief examples of how that works. Rodney Stark, the social historian, in his book about the rise of Christianity, explains that during the first few centuries of the Christian church, the church grew most rapidly during times of plague and pandemic. You see, Christians did something unique during those times that no one else seemed to do, and this was documented even by the Roman Emperor Julian. They stayed put in the plague-ridden cities at the risk of their own lives, caring for those who were sick, not just within the Christian community, but outside of it as well. As a result of that, many people not only survived the plague, but also embraced the Christian faith. And Rodney Stark asked the question, why did they do such a thing? Were they more brave than everyone else in society in that they were willing to risk their lives to care for others? And he says, actually, that's not the case. Christians did what they did, not because they were more brave, but simply because they were being consistent with what they believed. You see, if you believe that death is the end, you will do anything you can to avoid death. It is the greatest of all evils. But if you know that death is not the end, if you know there is something beyond it, indeed, if you know that the best is yet to come, you will be liberated from the fear of death to be able to sacrificially serve others and make a difference in a hurting world. The second example happened on the 28th of August, 1963. Martin Luther King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and declared that he had a dream of racial equality and unity. But that dream was rooted in rich biblical imagery. For Martin Luther King was a Christian who had a strong vision of a future day when God was going to restore and transform our world and bring ultimate justice. But that future hope didn't lead King to bury his head in the sand and hope for the best, but it drove him to want to bring about justice now and to fight to change what was wrong about our world. You see, when you have this kind of hope in our future, it doesn't lead you to bury your head in the sand, but it leads you to want to make a difference in whatever way you can, because you know that the best is yet to come and you have hope. I wonder, do you have that hope for yourself? But the last objection you might have is this. Well, why doesn't God do it now? If God is one day going to set this world free from pain and injustice, why doesn't he do it today? Why do we have to go on living in all the uncertainty of this broken world? And I think the answer is not because God doesn't care, but rather because he does. You see, if the problem of our world is that we are broken, then the solution to our broken world has to be that we need to change. So before God makes a new world, he needs to make new people. He needs to make us new. And he wants to hold out to us the offer of his forgiveness and the transformation that comes when he comes into our lives and we become connected in a living and dynamic way to him in a real living relationship with the God who made us. But he offers that to us as a gift. I wonder, have you ever received that gift? Have you ever received the forgiveness, the transformation and the hope that Jesus can bring? But before we go to questions, maybe I could just ask the question of you. What do you make of all of this? Maybe you think, well, this is rubbish. I don't believe it at all. And if that's the case, thanks so much for watching. You could have turned off and started watching something else by now. So thanks for sticking with us to the end. But if that is what you think, can I just throw out a challenge? If you're going to reject the Christian story in answer to the question of our broken world, how else are you going to account for our experiences of brokenness that we see all around us? And where else are you going to find hope that can really take you through the darkest times of life? And ultimately, what are you going to do with the person of Jesus? Why not at least take a couple of hours to read through one of the biographical accounts of his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke or John, and ask yourself, maybe for the first time or maybe afresh, what do I make of Jesus? Maybe you're intrigued by what you've heard and you want to find out more, you've got more questions, and we'll tell you in a moment how you can find out more about what you've just heard, and we'd love to be in touch with you to help you continue this investigation. But maybe this morning you have a real sense that this could well be true. This does seem to make sense. But you want to know how you can experience it for yourself. How can you know this forgiveness, this transformation, and this hope that Jesus Christ offers? Well, the wonderful thing is you can, and he wants to offer it to you. It's not something we need to earn. It's not something we can deserve, but it's a gift that we are invited to receive. So why not take time now to talk to this God and to ask him to do that for you? Maybe the words of this prayer would be helpful for you to echo in your heart, wherever you're watching from. You could say something like this: God, I'm sorry for the way I've kept you out of my life. I'm sorry for the way that I've caused hurt and pain to other people. Thank you that you came to suffer with me and for me. Please come into my life now. Please give me this fresh start. Be with me through life. And thank you for the hope that one day you're going to make everything new and I can be part of that. Amen. Or if you have prayed that prayer, or if that's something you're seriously considering, then again, we'd love to be in touch with you to help you know how you can get started and to continue this wonderful and exciting adventure, which is a relationship with the God of the universe. Do get in touch with us. But I look forward to hearing your questions. Please do be writing them down now, and we'll be back to look at those in a few moments' time.